Hey everyone, it's Book of Catherine, and today is November 13th, 2022. I just posted my 10 weeks of Enoch timeline. It took a long time to do. I'm very excited about it. For those of you who have been with me for a while, you know that I just published a few months ago the 7,000 year Adam Covenant. This went from May 6th of 7,000 years ago to May 6th of this year, 2022. And as you see, we had 14 billion years ago. We had the eternal tree of life. And then came the fall 7,000 years ago. And the Lord promised us 7 days and aka 7,000 years before the judgment, the death judgment. And so I made this chart, this timeline about those 7,000 years, just marking where a few things happened. But then I found out about the weeks of Enoch. It turned out that Enoch had seen a vision of the next 7,000 years, and he broke it up into 10 sets of 700 years. And he said certain events would happen during that time. I finally finished it, and I put these as just kind of Cliff Notes version. The dates here are just when each week starts. But I'm going to go ahead and go through this timeline with you today in detail so we can kind of clear up any questions you may have on this entire timeline, which is very exciting to have. It revealed a lot of things, and I have to say, it has taught me a lot about the way the Lord views certain periods of time. For example, the time of King Solomon, it turned out that he was paying attention to Elijah, who ascended into heaven. And honestly, we don't really talk about Elijah much today. And yet, during the time of King Solomon, King David, that period, the Lord was really paying attention to people like Elijah. So anyway, let's get going and let's start with week 1. Here we go. So in the first week, this is what Enoch says. I was born the 7th in the first week, the first 700 years, while judgment and righteousness still endured. And basically, the reason I said this, righteousness reigns. After the fall 7,000 years ago, goodness endures for 1 week or 7,000 years. Enoch is born during that time. And according to our timeline that we have today, that runs about 4,979 BCE to about 44279 BCE. Basically, what we know about this is that when Adam and Eve fell, they were extremely sad about that, and they begged for forgiveness numerous times. The book of Adam and Eve tells us about that time, and they're very apologetic. And so what we know is that, during this first 700 years, judgment and righteousness endured because Adam and Eve, remember, Adam lived for nearly 1,000 years. So he was alive during this entire first week. Adam had not passed away yet. I believe that Enoch did. He died before Adam. But Adam really made sure that judgment and righteousness reigned. Even with Cain, Cain faced a lot of judgment and ostracized. Like, he was ostracized from society. And so what we know is that the kings came to Enoch and sought his advice, and he really was a conduit for the Lord's word on this earth, and they followed the Lord's calendar. It's not until the second week, 700 years in, that things start going awry. It says, and after me, after Enoch, after me there shall arise in the second week, that's 700 years to 1400 years. Second week, great wickedness and deceit shall have sprung up, and in it there shall be the first end. And we know that the first end was the great flood, right? That was the first end, is when the flood came, or the flood judgment. Noah's Ark is the way most of us know that story. So it says that will be the first end, and in it a man shall be saved. That's Noah. And after it is ended, after the great flood, unrighteousness shall grow up again. Again it pops up, and we know that as the Tower of Babel. And a law shall be made for the sinners. So what they're talking about there is when the Tower of Babel came, great evil rose again with Nimrod. You can read about that in the book of Jubilees, and I believe in the book of Jasher. So here comes the Tower of Babel, and it enrages the Lord that all the people have come to this one city, and this one king rules it and does great evil. He uses the tower to kill all the men of good who fight for the Lord. Now you have to also remember that Abraham comes up during this time when Noah is still alive. And so Noah lives on quite a bit of time after the great flood. And so he sees the evil rise again, which may be the reason that he became drunk on the wine that he had sown in the earth. Anyway, so the Tower of Babel comes, and the law that happens is confusion. Mankind's language is confused, and they're spread across the earth. So that's why I said 700 years after the fall, wickedness crops up, it spreads. The first end comes, the flood judgment, and Noah is spared, but evil rises again, and mankind's language is confused, and they're separated out across the world. And this happens between 4,279 BCE to 3,579 BCE. So that's the second week. Let's go on to the third week. So this is happening between 1,400 years and 2,100 years after the fall. And still 700 years this week. And after that, in the third week, at its close, at the very end, a man shall be elected as the plant of righteous judgment. That means that root will eventually, that's the nation of Israel, basically, that will eventually give birth to the Messiah. And his posterity shall become the plant of righteousness forevermore. That means, and his seed, his descendants, will become the plant of righteousness forevermore. So what they're referring to, the plant of righteousness, is the 12 tribes, the tribe of Judah specifically. And righteousness will reign forevermore after the Messiah comes. He will reign on the throne forever after when he comes. So this is Father Abraham. So he's chosen at the end. That's very important to remember. So when it says 3,579 BCE to 2879 BCE, we know that Father Abraham is chosen and promised that he'll be the root of the Messiah. He's promised that towards the end of this, towards the 2879 BCE. So Father Abraham is chosen to be the plant of righteous judgment. His family tree will birth the Messiah who will reign righteous forever when he comes. And also remember that Abraham, at the same time, he's promised that he will have as many descendants as there are stars in the sky. And what happens is today we have Abrahamic religions, the entire Middle East, almost all of India. He did go on to birth much of the world that we have around us today. So the fourth week. So in the fourth week, we have Joseph. And after that, in the fourth week, at its close, again, this is at the very end, visions of the holy and righteous shall be seen, and a law for generations, and an enclosure shall be made for them. So visions of the holy and righteous shall be seen. That's Joseph. Joseph, the first thing we learn about Joseph is he has a vision of him in the cornfields and stars in the sky, the sun and the moon, and that they bow to him. And that's a prediction of the future 12 tribes of Israel. So that's why I say the 12 tribes of Israel are given the land of Goshen. That's this down here. And an enclosure shall be made for them. That's the land of Goshen. It's right at the mouth of the Nile River. And the Nile River goes straight to the land of Ophir, which is today, I believe, Kenya and Zimbabwe. I can't remember it. But it's to the east of the Nile River, down in the middle of Africa, right around the Congo. And today, Tanzania, that's it, Tanzania, and they still have a ton of gold. So it's a big deal for the land of Goshen here, because the land of Goshen, that's the mouth of the Nile, that's a port city. And so the Pharaoh actually gives them, for Joseph also sees a prediction that there will be a great famine, basically a mega drought, which we now know actually happened, a great, huge mega drought that lasted for 3 years. And Joseph had prepared the Pharaoh, and they had enough stores of grain. Many, many tribes and nations were wiped out from that great, huge mega drought that happened after the great flood, not too long after it. Anyway, so his holy vision saves them. This begins 21 years after the fall, and that's the fourth week. In the fifth week, we are now 2,800 years after the fall. And we are about to get right to the halfway mark, 3,500 years. That's right, 3,500 years is the halfway mark of the last 7,000 years. And that is marked by the forming of Israel. The 12 tribes are freed. Now, you have to remember, when Moses and the Exodus happened under Thutmose II, when that happened, don't forget that everyone was allowed to go. The Lord was very clear about that anyone who wanted to leave could leave. It was not just the 12 tribes of Egypt or the 12 tribes of Judah or Israel or Jacob that went. Anyone who was a slave of Egypt was allowed to go. So it's a huge mix of nations that left. So during the last year, Pharaoh Thutmose II freed Egypt's slaves. A new nation is born. It has no earthly king. Instead, the Lord's covenant, his words and his writings and the tablets are kept in here in the Ark of the Covenant. And Moses doesn't enter the Holy Land, but right in the year 1479 BCE, right here, that's the year that they leave. That's the year Thutmose II dies, right during Passover of that year. If you look it up, he dies about like April 3rd or something like that, right around Passover. It's not long after Passover happens in the spring years. And so 1479, that's when the new nation is established. The Israelites leave and Exodus occurs and the Ark of the Covenant is established. So it's very interesting. The Lord doesn't talk about Moses. He says it's the house of glory and dominion shall be built forever at more. And that's because the 12 tribes of Israel eventually give us the Messiah. That's the house of glory and dominion, because Jesus Christ of Nazareth, he came from this line, this bloodline, the house of glory and dominion, that event that way back traces back to Abraham. Let's go on to the 6th week. Here we are at the 6th week. So we are now halfway through. It's 3,500 years in, and the 6th week gets kicked off. And we're halfway through the 7,000 years, the 10 weeks that he saw. And after that, in the 6th week, all who live in it shall be blinded. No kidding, if you guys know the history of Israel back then. And the hearts of all of them shall godlessly forsake wisdom, and in it a man shall ascend. And at its close the house of dominion shall be burnt with fire, and the whole race of the chosen root shall be dispersed. Now this is actually recorded very, very heavily. We know this from archaeological digs. We know that all this happened. We know that the new nation turns upon the Lord and his laws. They start erasing any mention of the Messiah. The elders turn to 70 gods of Egypt, and they turn the temple that Solomon built. They repaint it into a temple to worship the Egyptian gods. And in that time, he sends Elijah, the prophet of fire, who kills Jezebel. He kills Jezebel's prophets and all the prophets of Baal, of Satan, and he puts on quite a show. He even mocks them and makes fun of them, which it kind of makes me laugh, because I kind of do the same thing sometimes on Twitter. Those of you who have been following me, when I read about Elijah, I feel much less alone. It's pretty funny. So the new nation turns on the Lord and his laws. Elijah ascends in the chariot of fire. Assyria and Babylon disperse the tribes. Assyria takes away the northern tribes, known as Israel, and Babylon takes away the southern kingdom, known as Judah. They go ahead and take theirs, and all of the tribes are distributed and dispersed across the world. However, the ark, before any of that happens, the angels come down and hide the ark and all the writings in the earth, and the temple is burned down by Nebuchadnezzar. And that happens between 1479 and 779 BCE. So right at 779 BCE, we know that that's when the temple's burned down, which is not the timeline that we have today. There's an incorrect timeline that's about 500 years off. But that's why people don't get this right away. But if you really research the BC and CE timeline, you'll find that there's quite a bit. It's not that new of a timeline. Like, it's not that old of a timeline, and it was formed by people who didn't have a good set of history. We only just dug up, like, a lot of our history that we have today, we're only just digging up now. And so it makes sense that historians aren't exactly right with exactly where Jesus was born versus tribes that were 1,500 years old. Like, we didn't have Anyway, writing wasn't established. A sense of history didn't really exist until the last 150 years. So it makes sense that the timeline would be off a bit on when Jesus was born. Speaking of, when was Jesus born? He was actually born in this time in the 7th week, which is ironic because of a number of things that happen. 779 to 79 BCE, that is not a mistake. So all these sevens and all these nines, 7 is creation and 9 is the number of completion in the holy numbers. And Jesus is born towards the end of this time. And it's interesting to see the way the Lord writes about it, because it's not accentuated by the Messiah. It's accentuated by other things that the Messiah does. And after that, in the 7th week, shall an apostate generation arise. That means an evil generation that doesn't follow any of the Lord's laws, which is true. We know that the Israelites and the Sadducees and the Pharisees come up, and we know they rewrote the laws of the Jubilees. They really took on a lot of the laws from Babylon. Instead of letting the sun dictate their day, they started letting the moon dictate their day. Even today, they still say the day begins with when the sun goes away instead of when the sun goes up. They say the new year starts when the sun goes down in the southern hemisphere, when 95% of humanity lives in the northern hemisphere. No, the Lord's law, and even if you read the Torah, it says that it begins, the new day begins at dawn when the sun comes up, and the new year begins March 20th when the sun returns to the northern hemisphere, when spring comes back, when life bursts again for the majority of people who live on earth. Right? So it makes sense that the Lord would call this generation apostate, especially since they kill the Messiah. And many shall be its deeds, and all its deeds shall be apostate. And at its close shall be elected the elect righteous of the eternal plant. That's not just the Messiah, but also the Messiah's apostles. And it says they're the elect righteous of the eternal plant of righteousness, because they're elected from the 12. The 12 disciples are elected from the 12 tribes of Israel. Not all 12 tribes are representative, but all of the apostles, all 12 apostles specifically chosen by Jesus, not Paul, not at all. He's a false prophet, but the 12 are elected to receive sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation. And that sevenfold instruction is Revelations. Go ahead and look into it. Chuck Missler has some excellent studies on Revelation and how 7 is throughout it's repeated everywhere, not just 7 trumpets, not just 7 bowls, but even the structure, like sentence structure. Jesus comes and speaks to 7 churches that are up there in Turkey, into what's now considered Turkey, but back then the heart of the Roman Empire. And so all throughout Revelations, even the sentences are formed in 7s. So that's why it says sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation. And it describes in very great detail the first apocalypse that comes, that the Knights of Britain eventually complete. So I say here, so in that time, both Revelations and Jesus come. Jerusalem is reestablished, but they've fallen for Babylon's ways. The Messiah chooses the 12. They raise each other from the dead. So according to the Bible and according to what Jesus says, these disciples should still be living. And John is given the book of Revelations, which is the sevenfold instruction, which I don't think it's an accident that the timeline says 779 to 79 BCE. This is probably the generation that actually took the timeline and made sure that it was dissuaded. This generation did quite a bit. This was the first generation when the Messiah came to start locking up books and start hiding them and saying, oh, these are too holy for you to read. Even the book of Enoch, look it up. When they banned the book of Enoch, they banned it to the holy priests. They said it would give the actual people, the normal people, the peasants, it would give them nightmares. It was too holy for them to behold. It's not that it wasn't inspired by God or written by a prophet. It was that it was too holy of a book. But in reality, the book of Enoch gives us this 7,000 years, tells us when the Messiah is coming back, tells us when the first apocalypse is taking place. It tells us a whole bunch of things, but even more so, it tells people how to kill demons, where demons came from. So it's quite an apostate generation. This week, the 7th week, the Lord doesn't talk as harshly about any other generation, not even the generation that was wiped out during the Great Flood. This 7th week, he speaks the most harshly about. the seventh week of creation when Jesus comes. And I guess they had to be apostate for them to murder their own Messiah. All right, eighth week. He says a lot about the eighth week. A new chapter is started in the book of Enoch. And it says, and after that there should be another, the eighth week, that of righteousness. And a sword shall be given to it, that a righteous judgment may be executed on the oppressors. And that sword, from what I can tell, is Excalibur. And sinners shall be delivered into the hands of the righteous. That's the first crusade, not the Knights of the Templars. From what I understand, those were quite evil. But in the beginning, it was King Arthur, and they took out the unrighteous, and they delivered the oppressed out, all the saints. It's a long story, but you can read it. That's why today Excalibur and Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table are all still considered heroes. And at its close they shall acquire houses, like banners, like names, like the House of Tudor and things like that, houses through their righteousness. And also, by the way, the book of Revelations does talk about these seats in chapter 20. It says thrones will be established. So these are the houses they're talking about. And a house shall be built for the great king in glory forevermore. And all mankind shall look to the path of uprightness. So that house could be the Sophia, Hague of Sophia. That is a house for the Holy Spirit. But in reality, the Holy Spirit kind of takes over judgment, as you'll see, for the earth. So this is the time of King Arthur. A sword named Excalibur is given to King Arthur. His knights ride against evil, the very first crusades, the early crusades, and establish peace. Houses are given to each. And this is from 79 BCE to 621 CE. So it says there's plenty of evidence to show that the knights were not that far off from Jesus. They're only like 7 generations, 6, 7, or 8 generations from Christ. They had good records back then. The house of the Lord really started keeping good records. And it's a very interesting thing to watch. So then we get into the church age. It doesn't actually begin in 621 AD or CE. It begins, from what I can tell, around 821 or 840. That's when I clock it, from 840 to 1840, when Queen Victoria takes the throne and begins a massive bout of labor camps and Marxism that just wipes out hundreds of millions of people in the world. So anyway, here we are at the 9th week. The 9th week is now 5,600 years in to 6,300 years in. It says, and after that, in the 9th week, the righteous judgment shall be revealed to the whole world, and all the works of the godless shall vanish from all the earth, and the world shall be written down for destruction. So basically, this is when the final parts of Revelations happens, the final judgment happens, Babylon falls, and just all the evil is wiped out from the earth. It's quite all the crusades that happen. It's kind of the Dark Ages in many ways. There's not a lot written because for a whole number of reasons. So here's the church age. Millennium of Christ begins. Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and things truly do change. I mean, we didn't just suddenly get steam engines and electricity out of nowhere. We got it because the church age began and people started talking directly to the Creator. And when you start doing that, boy, we discovered oil, we discovered steam, we discovered lightning, electricity, and humanity just leapt forward. We have toilets, we have plumbing, and a lot of that is because this church age began. The world becomes free to follow the Lord and turn to Him and His Holy Spirit for judgment. And even though the Bible is something Rome created, this is the best icon I could come up with for the church age. So right around the end of this is when the Bible actually starts being printed, and then people start reading Paul and become slaves again. But that's when Satan is unbound, right around here. So we are finally at the 10th week, which starts in 1321 AD, or CE as you want to call it. And during the 7th part, which is the last 100 years, that begins in 1921. It says that the fallen angels will be judged. They're also known as the Watchers, the fallen angels. That's in Enoch. They're called Watchers. But if you read Enoch, you realize they're the fallen angels, the ones who fell, the 1/3, the minority. And then the final exodus to the new earth begins. So here's what it specifically says. And after this, in the 10th week, in the 7th part, there shall be the great eternal judgment, in which the Lord will execute vengeance amongst His angels. And the first heaven shall depart and pass away. And by the way, this is happening. The first heaven shall depart. We have already discovered like 800 stars that have disappeared in the sky. And we know that the stars are angels. Beautiful, beautiful angels. That's why we love gazing upon them and studying them. And a new they watch us. That's their job, is to watch us. And a new heaven shall appear, and all the powers of the heavens shall give sevenfold light. As you've noticed, I'm sure the sun has grown 3 times as bright in just the last year, since September 2021. It's grown 3 times as bright. Right now, it might actually be, as of the publishing of this, November 13th, 2022, it may actually be 4 times as bright since September 24th, 2021. And I just wanted to go over this, by the way, right here at the very end where it says ends March 18th, 2022. My point in saying that was that this entire thing, the 7,000 years, it ended over here on March 18th, 2022, because the Lord's calendar runs from the spring equinox year round. So the spring equinox runs around March 18th to 19th to 20th. That's the new year according to the Lord. So all of these dates, when you read them, like when the Exodus happens, it happens in spring, March 20th, 1479. You can look it up in the dates. They actually narrowed it down to that's when Thutmose II died, right around March, April of 1479 BCE. So that's always the new year. That's why the Lord starts the new year then, because that's when the Exodus happened. And so I hope that helps you guys. This has been the Prophet Enoch's 10 weeks, the Apocalypse Weeks timeline, Enoch 91 through 93. And since all of these check out and will help archaeologists so much in figuring out when you combine it with things like the 7,000 year covenant of Adam, they both overlay perfectly. The Exodus of 3,500 years ago, 1479 BCE. These two perfectly line over these two calendars. And I really hope they help you guys out. But that also means that the new heaven and the new earth have come and that you're able to go to them. So we're all able to go to them right now. This world is dying. The 7,000 years are up. It certainly looks like it, that it's dying. But that means, the good news is that means a new heaven and a new earth are already out there and people are on their way to it. And it also says, according to Revelations and to Jesus, to all the texts, that there will be a remnant left behind to fight the final battle. So according to them, the final battle is happening. Quite frankly, you and I both know that if you watch Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the war that happens between Voldemort, it makes the skies turn these awful colors. It makes the bridges fall down. And we're having the same thing happen. We're watching bridges fall down all across the world. And every time I look at the skies, it reminds me of these end times. We look like we're living in an apocalyptic movie. It's happening all around us. And so I'm not surprised that the final battle is happening right now. And thankfully, we know that we're able to talk directly to the Father, the one who created it all, and ask him where he wants each of us to go. So I hope this helps all of you guys. I love you so much. You make my life worth living in all the pain that I'm in. I'm finally in the clinic and I'm getting better, but it's a very slow road. And so you guys and your support, I can't thank you enough. Oh, right. And they're making movies about me now. I don't get I'm not that involved with the movie making, but I do encourage you, if you want to, this Thanksgiving weekend, the third movie is coming out that's loosely based on my actual life and some of my friends. So it's going to be Book of Catherine and the Three Islands, and it premieres in New York City on Wednesday, November 23rd, but it will be a worldwide release. So November 24th, midnight, early in the morning. If you guys want to go see it, I would love it. And it does help. I do get a small portion of the proceeds, and it helps with my medical care. And I can't thank you guys enough for actually following me and helping this sort of thing happen, because I don't know, you guys are amazing. So thank you. You helped me make this list. You helped me make all of this, and I couldn't have done it without you. All right. Love you guys so much. Have an amazing, well, wherever this finds you, whatever day, whatever time, just know that I love you and I made this for you. See you guys around the bend. Bye.